Hi, everyone. I am Kelly, and this is Two Broads Talking Politics Live. I am on today with Senator Jennifer McClellan, who's a state senator in Virginia and is running for governor of Virginia. So, hello, Senator McClellan.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you for having me tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining me. So I'd love to start with just a little bit of background. I know you've been in the state legislature a while. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. And then we can talk about kind of why you are running to be governor.
Sure. So I got elected to our House of Delegates back in 2005, and it was not something I had planned to do at the time. I had gotten involved in politics as a kid in college, sort of as a young Democrat and volunteer and working to get other people elected, and thought I would make my impact just being a lawyer. But when the opportunity came, I decided I want to be the one making change and not just electing other people to do it. So I spent 11 years in the House, moved over to our Senate in 2017. And the real reason I decided to run for governor is even though I've been able to have some success on the issues that are important to me, improving our education system, expanding access to healthcare, expanding worker rights, addressing climate change. At the end of the day, the governor sets the agenda, and I started to think about it last year because Virginia was doing pretty well, but not for everybody. We had too many communities and too many people who had been left behind. We had inequity baked into a lot of our systems, not just racial inequity, but inequity across a number of measures. And so I started to think about being a governor who would center equity as a part of that sort of progressive agenda and solving people's problems. COVID really sealed it because COVID laid those inequities bare. When we saw the murder of George Floyd, it laid those inequities bare. And it really heightened the need to not just get through a healthcare and economic crisis, but rebuild our economy, rebuild our healthcare system, rebuild our education system, rebuild our criminal justice system in a way that not only addresses that inequity, but begins to restore faith that a lot of people have lost in government's ability to care and understand their problems, let alone solve them. And I think any lingering doubt I had ended in the weeks after George Floyd's death, as I thought back to my parents who grew up in the segregated South during the Depression, and my grandparents and my great grandparents, and it's like I'm fighting the same fights they fought, and I can't look my kids in the eye and say I did everything I could to keep you from fighting those fights if I'm not willing to step up, run for the most powerful office, and use that office to solve those problems and keep them from having to fight those fights.
So you mentioned that Virginia, like everywhere in the country, still has some inequity. Virginia has been turning increasingly blue, increasingly Democratic over the past few cycles. It went from being sort of a purple swing state to really a fairly Democratic state, especially with the flip in the state legislature a few years ago. But what's sort of the experience on the ground for people? Like, it's one thing to have a state legislature and Congress that are blue, but, what does that actually mean for people in their day-to-day lives? And, what are some of those areas where there's still more work to do?
So this, while we have been blue for a while, our legislature was still Republican. And this year, with the November 2019 elections, for the first time since I was in college, Virginia Democrats controlled, every branch of government. And so we were able to make a lot of progress in, removing barriers to reproductive health, expanding access to healthcare, expanding Medicaid, creating a state-based exchange. Virginia became the first state in the South to pass a 100% clean energy standard, extend worker protections to domestic workers, raise the minimum wage, pass transformative, we became the first state in the South to extend anti-discrimination protections to the LGBTQ community. that's just the tip of the iceberg of what we did this year. But it was almost 30 years of backlog. But when I talk about the inequity, what a lot of people are only now starting to realize was that decades, and in some cases centuries, of policy centered in a white supremacist past didn't go away when slavery ended and when Jim Crow legally ended. There were legacies that impacted communities of color on a day-to-day basis, even when people didn't realize or didn't know it. And as more people who were born after Jim Crow ended and didn't learn that history in school and didn't understand that history, didn't know how a policy that on its face may seem like a good idea would make that inequity worse. We began to have those conversations after the Unite the Right rally in 2017. We began to have those conversations after the blackface scandals of 2019. And we definitely, I think almost everyone who didn't get that began to get it after George Floyd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there has never, shockingly, never been a Black woman governor in this country. Stacey Abrams, of course, should have won.
She did win.
He did win in 2018, but did not get to serve as governor.
Yeah.
So what would that mean? You know, we finally now are going to have a Black woman as vice president, which is super exciting. But what would it mean to have a statewide elected governor, especially in the South, who is a Black woman?
It would mean so much. I mean, we have heard since we were kids that we're a government by, of, and for the people. And that means that government, the policies that we produce is only as good as the people who participate. And for a very long time, only white landowning men were allowed to participate. And even, again, legally, once women and you know, Black and brown communities were allowed to vote, our government doesn't reflect the full diversity of the governed. And as a result, their experiences are not centered, their problems are not centered. And all of us, our political views and our policy views are just naturally shaped by our experiences and what we know. And so the more diverse voices are at the table, the more, and especially marginalized communities, the more their problems will be addressed. So that's globally what it means. Personally, and I cry every time I talk about what Kamala's election means. I'm going to try not to. But personally, it means that little girls of color, and Black girls in particular, and Indian girls in particular, never have to doubt I can do that. And you know, somewhat, you know, I'm 48 years old. I have had to work twice as hard, be twice as prepared, be twice as smart, and still sometimes be told you're not good enough. And to be able to be a role model and to be able to break that glass ceiling, you know, I feel the weight of that. And I feel the weight of my ancestors who couldn't dream of that, but who sacrificed and fought and died in some cases for the ability for me to do that.
Yeah.
And that's really what that means.
Yeah, I did not expect the night that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris finally gave their, like, acceptance speech once the AP and everybody called it. I did not expect to be as emotionally moved as I was. I
Oh,
thought I
yeah.
had processed all of those emotions already, and seeing Kamala give that speech, I was just bawling.
Well, and for me, and I watched it, my daughter and my son, and when the motorcade came and they said, it was Kamala, and my son said, "Who is that?" Just said, he saw the car. He said, "Well, who is that?" I said, "It is Vice President elect Kamala Harris." And I still get choked up saying that, because I was just so overwhelmed with relief and pride, and obviously I still do. um, when she takes the oath of office, I probably will just be a blubbering pile of tears.
I think there will be a lot of us that are
Yeah.
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 Yeah. So this election, of course, we don't want to say that 2021 is an off year. It's an odd year, but it is not at all an off year, especially in Virginia. So you have these odd year elections. And this is, I think so many people are sort of, we're almost electioned out after 2020, right? And so now, for those of you in Virginia, you have to immediately sort of turn and go, okay, now the next thing. Now we're looking at next
Mhm.
year's election. So how do you sort of think about that, being in this odd year that most states do not have elections, at least not big elections in, and we're still in COVID, still have lots of, the numbers are even worse now than they were. But knowing that by the time the next governor takes office, hopefully things will start to be, on the swing back to, normal, whatever normal is at this point. How do you sort of process all that? How do you think about campaigning during all of that?
Well, it definitely doesn't look like the way I thought, but to be honest, there was never a playbook for me anyway. um, and I think, and I had the benefit of watching 2020 campaigns and sort of how they adjusted to COVID, and so I didn't have to, kind of create the wheel from scratch. Um, but it really is interesting to have to think about, because I'm still a sitting senator too. Is like we're getting ready to go into a legislative session, and so we're both balancing how do we navigate the current crisis and how we think ahead to recovery. But it's it's but some of the basics have not changed. The technology we're using to communicate, the way we're communicating may be different, but the basics are still, people want to know, what are you going to do to make my life better? What are you going to do to help me get a job, get back to work? What are you going to do to help me make sure my kids get a good education, that I can get access to a doctor if I get sick, that I can get sick days if I need them, and I can get paid family medical leave. And a lot of those issues that and especially the inequity issues I was talking about, they were issues before. Small businesses were on the margins before. Workers were struggling before. So we've kind of always known, policy-wise, some of the things we need to do. It's just more urgent. And in some ways it's easier because I don't have to explain that urgency now. Everybody kind of gets it. But we definitely have to be more flexible. And it's a good opportunity to figure out where people are and then meet them where they are, rather than just always following this sort of formula. You put a TV commercial up, you throw some stuff on social media, you knock on some doors, you make some phone calls, and that's it. So I see a lot of opportunity in it. And I definitely love the challenge. So this is definitely a challenge.
Definitely. And
Yeah.
how do we make sure that the recovery, the sort of getting back to normal, isn't just getting back to the old way of doing things? I think
Yeah.
we think of this, it can be an opportunity to change things for the better in our society, but how do we make sure that people aren't just like, well, I just want to get back to the way things were?
Unfortunately, we don't have a choice. There were some trends that were coming that were probably going to be here, 2, 3, 5 years from now that are here now. And so in a lot of ways, we can't go back to where we were. I think technology, for people who are fortunate enough to work from home, there's been a culture shift in a lot of those workplaces that will have ripple effects. I think this summer, now that everyone recognizes that inequity, there is a fiercer sense of we have to fix it and move forward. That the advocate community, that the voters expect us to address. So I don't think we can go back to where we were. We have to identify what has COVID changed permanently, and how do we manage that transition in a way that doesn't hurt anybody, and meets people where they are. And that's why the next, it's almost like it's the perfect time for a new generation of leadership and a new perspective, because that new perspective already recognizes the old ways didn't work for everybody.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's this tension that I'm sure is true in Virginia as it is in the whole country, that there is inequity that we see and racial justice issues that are definitely coming to the fore and are prevalent. But there's also the more rural communities who are also feeling left behind, who have different kinds of problems with equity and access. And so what does that look like in Virginia, and what are the kinds of things that the state legislature and you as the governor would be looking to do to make sure that these communities that feel like just no one's paying any attention to us, that we are addressing those needs in a way that, of course, doesn't take away from the very real important needs of other communities.
Right. I think the first step is just showing up and listening empathetically. And when you do that, you realize that there's more that unites us than divides us. I represent a Senate district that in some parts is very rural, in some parts is very suburban, and some parts are very urban. And it's a pretty decent microcosm of the rest of the state. And no matter where you are, those same kind of core things. You want your kid to get a good education. You want, all the things that I just said. The challenges to get there are different. And so you have to recognize it's not a one size fits all solution, but there's some key things like our rural areas have always been struggling to get economic development. They have struggled to, with inequity in the education system because they don't have economic development. It's hard to get economic development because they don't have broadband. That's a very similar issue in the urban areas. And so when you start to focus on what do we have in common, it's a lot easier to have policies that say the goals are the same, but the barriers to getting there are different. Now let's make sure we are centering both perspectives in creating our policy. But you can't do that if you don't show up. Right. And you're not asking what's happening. It's not just giving them a seat at the table, it's taking the table out to those communities and seeing what it is that you're trying to fix firsthand, not just relying on somebody to come and tell you, hey, they need help out there. You need to go see it for yourself.
Yeah. So if people are watching or listening and are interested in helping out your campaign in a weird time when, you can help from anywhere because it's all the same.
Yes.
What are some ways that people can help out?
So if you can go to my website, which is jennifermcclellan.com, there is an area you can get involved. You can donate. You can sign up to volunteer. You can endorse if you're particularly in the Virginia area, and there's so many different ways. We will be doing virtual phone banks, text banking, meet and greets, fundraisers. Everything from social media, highlighting and amplifying social media, help with graphic design. There are many different specific ways people can volunteer, but if you go to the website, sign up to volunteer, the staff will follow up with you to figure out sort of what specifically your talents are and your preferences are. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Jen McClellan VA. It's with 2 N's. And I think I never remember my Facebook. So I'm gonna
I'll put all those links on our website too, so people can find them.
Thank you. Yeah, it's Send Jennifer McClellan. But we will be organizing through social media as well. But if you sign up on the website, someone will follow up and definitely put you to work.
Terrific. Is there anything else that you'd like to make sure we talk about today?
I think part of what I got engaged and interested in politics. There are a lot of people who got engaged and involved out of anger after 2016. And anger is a powerful motivator, but so is hope. And so is, a passion for changing, change for the better and helping people. And I got interested and engaged in government and politics in a way as a kid, hearing the call and the unfinished work of, Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Shirley Chisholm and John F. Kennedy, who and Barack Obama was the same way, who inspired people with the view that politics and government can be a noble profession because it's a call to public service and helping people. And we've lost that. Mm-hmm. And for good reasons. It's hard to be hopeful when the orange one was in the White House. But we need that so much right now. We need that so much right now because people are so hurting and stressed. After 4 years of chaos, after an unleashing of hatred and bitterness and anger, and more, just as important as the policies that I want to put in place as governor, I want to inspire not just the next generation, but my generation and future generations to just get involved and make a difference. So I want to end with a quick story that, last year there was a group of multi-generational Black women. We were having a roundtable kind of talking about politics, and there was a young lady who was about to graduate college, and she wasn't saying anything. And I looked at her and I was like, we need to hear from you. And she said, all of you around this table has seen progress in your life, but I haven't. She was in elementary school when Barack Obama was elected president. 2016 was the first election she ever voted in. And she said, for my friends, we're going to have crushing student debt. We're not going to be able to get a job. We're not going to have access to healthcare. The earth is dying. Why bother? And it was almost like a slap in the face because I thought about how hard my parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents fought to have the right to bother and care and be part of the process. And I looked at her and I said, Alicia, if you give up hope, we are all lost. And I took her under my wing. She now works for me on my campaign. And that was like the kick in the butt that I needed to say, politics cannot just be about what are you voting against and what are you marching against, but what are you marching and voting for? And I hope that my candidacy, my campaign, and my eventual administration can help restore some of that hope and faith in the power of people to just make change.
Yeah, I love that. I've been reading Barack Obama's latest book, and at the beginning of the book going, oh, right, I remember how we all felt in 2008, and it was just like so exciting. And yeah, it's that hope would be really nice to have again.
Yeah.
Well, Senator McClellan, thank you so much for joining me today. I will put on our website links to your campaign and your social media so that people can find them and check you out.
Thank you, Kelly. It was good to see you. You have a great night.
You too.